The South African BRICS Business Council says it's hoping to narrow the trade gap with other members of the bloc. Currently, the country is importing far more than it's exporting to fellow BRICS members. Let's discuss this further with Council member Stavros Nicolau. Stavros, good evening to you. Thanks for your time. I'm keen to know, what are the particular trade routes that you think need to be exploited here? We've had a number of years of BRICS now. Why do you think it is that the full trade opportunities within this bloc have not materialized?
Right, firstly, thanks very much for having me on the show, and I think maybe just to paint some perspective on this, and perhaps to give a little more clarity. I think the first thing we need to note is that overall trade within the BRICS bloc has grown. Just to demonstrate some of the numbers, from 2017 to 2021. We've seen a 44% growth within BRICS, and that, of course, outstrips the average global growth over that corresponding period. So I think there's no doubt that trade has grown within BRICS, but as you correctly point out, we need to zero in, a decade on and understand what all of that means. Now, we have noticed that South Africa's exports have grown to the BRICS countries. But the analysis that we've done is we've got to look at the type of exports. And we are still top heavy in exporting raw material and importing finished value-added products, so manufactured products from the other BRIC partner countries is being imported in the country, and that's the analysis we've looked at, and we've gone down and broken that further into a sectorial analysis by each of the 4 BRIC countries. So we've got a pretty good grasp now as to what are the major imports that come in from China, for example, or what are the exports that go from South Africa to Brazil. Now, why have we done that exercise? Because we need to become a little more laser focused on identifying what are those products outside of raw materials that we can begin to export from South Africa into these 4 BRIC markets. And they're very big markets. I should have cited another statistic, which I think most viewers will find interesting, that BRICS as a bloc represents 31.5% now of globalized GDP. So it's eclipsed the G7 in terms of global GDP size. So it is a significant opportunity, but we need to start getting the right products there and exporting less raw material and exporting more finished value-added manufactured products.
The disparity that we have around trade within the bloc, is quite vast. You look at China, which of course is the biggest trading partner in the bloc, and then you have Russia. They account for close on 70% if we're rounding that figure off. And then you have Russia, that's sort of right at the bottom, and the amount of trade there is just marginal. What are the lessons that you sort of learned from why that is the case? And you're making the point about the exports of raw materials. What is it exactly that's leading to this disparity?
So I think there are a number of issues. It's quite a complex question that I could never do justice to in the short space of time we have here. So let me just flag 2 issues coming out of your question. I think the first is we do need to acknowledge that our exports have grown, which is a good thing, right? Albeit that it's not always the type of exports we want. So we view that as an opportunity rather than a negative as a business council, because it allows us to zero in on a complementary basis, because I think these partnerships are all based on complementarity. So it allows us to zero in on a complementary basis and to look at how do we open up routes to market for some of these manufactured products that we seek to produce and export out of our country. Agriculture, agribusiness is a big opportunity for us. And if I have a look at the trade patterns on agriculture, they vary amongst the 4 BRIC countries. So that in itself presents an opportunity. So I think that's the first thing I wanted to flag. And the second thing is, of course, the biggest deficit would be, as you would expect, with China, because China imports a significant amount of manufactured products into South Africa. And I think that we've got to look at, for example, a Chinese buying mission that is coming to South Africa in the next few days. And we've got to say, well, how do we best utilize those buying missions to even out the trade patterns a little? There's no problem running trade deficits, but as long as you are catching up or narrowing those trade deficits with the right type of products, that's what we should be striving to do. And that's what we're going to be putting on the table in our BRICS Business Council meetings, which takes place alongside the summit later on this month.
One of the particular concerns, of course, around, the fact that, yes, we've increased exports, but these are still largely raw materials, is that it doesn't answer the question that South Africa is facing locally, which is around industrialization of our economy and ensuring that we're able to increase our manufacturing capacity and the extent to which we're actually building that capacity within our own borders.
Yeah, so you're quite right. I mean, our localization policy has been somewhat capricious. I think we've got a very clearly set out policy, but the implementation thereof, if I just look at procurement by certain government departments, for example, they're still very heavily weighted towards imported products. So I think going back to your earlier question, why are we seeing some of the trade patterns we are within BRICS? And I think charity starts at home. I think we've got to garner domestic volumes and economies of scale so that we can get a more global competitiveness. And, of course, the BRIC countries, the 4 BRIC countries, present significant markets for us. But we also have to get our house in order back home, get economies of scale. So put differently, we need to leverage domestic volumes to create global competitiveness, including exporting to BRIC.
I wonder what position we are in, sort of going into negotiations and talks of this nature, and the amount of sway that we have as a country, because, number one, we're dealing with a small economy comparative to the others in the bloc. And South Africa, has often been described as sort of the small S in the BRICS countries. And what position does that put us in, especially ahead of the summit coming up later this month?
Look, there's no doubt we are the smallest economy in BRICS. And, one can take a sort of a negative view on that. I have a slightly different view. I think the fact that South Africa sits in a bloc of that size presents significant opportunity. And the small S is not a small S for me. It's a big S, because that big S is the fulcrum and the conduit to bringing the rest of the continent together. So I think what presents a tremendous opportunity here is the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, which collectively, if I take Africa's GDP at the moment, is edging towards $4 trillion. Suddenly you get a very different scale and size that you can put on the negotiating or put to the negotiating table when you have these conversations. And I think that's where we're seeing the opportunity. But we should also never lose sight of we are the 32nd largest economy in the world as South Africa. So we're not entirely that small. But the fact that we are in this club in itself, I think, is an achievement, because it allows us to bring the rest of the continent with us. And it's not by accident that the theme that South Africa has chosen for this BRICS summit is Africa and BRICS, promoting partnerships, collaboration, and multilateralism. And I think therein lies the opportunity. Is it a quick fix or an easy fix? Certainly not. But I think what we would like to see as a council is that we see iterative and incremental improvement of the trading patterns. I think that's what we would like to see.
Stavros Nicolau is the head of the SA BRICS Business Council. Thanks for your time tonight.